All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Untherapeutic. I'm super excited. Today we have Dr. Shaenor, maternal mental health therapist. And this is a super important topic, one that
Mhm.
often gets overlooked, unfortunately. And so I'm excited to kind of dive in and kind of discuss, what we should be looking for. What is maternal mental health for people who may not know? But before we do that, Dr. Shaenor, kind of, introduce yourself, tell the audience about who you are and kind of, your specialty.
Yeah, so I am Dr. Shaenor, maternal mental health therapist. I am a psychotherapist with a telehealth practice throughout Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. I specialize in women's mental health in that sense. So everything that covers from when we talk about during the prenatal period. So if you're planning pregnancy planning, so if we talk about infertility in that sense, all the way through to the postpartum period, usually up to 2 years postpartum. But I will continue to see you after that. I also see women as it pertains to life transitions in various stages of life in that sense. And I also see couples. So there's a full spectrum there that I work as it pertains to women's mental health, but specifically maternal mental health. I am a professor. I do teach sometimes human behavior class and sometimes the diversity class in social justice for social work program because I am a licensed clinical social worker. I am a mom myself. I also always include that in my bio because it's something I'm very proud of. I am a wife. I am a mom. I
Mhm.
have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I have been in the field for over 10 years,
Oh, wow.
whether it's working within the medical social work field or the clinical social work field, insurance social work. So
Mm.
I collaborate all that experience that I have in order to serve my clients within my private practice.
Hey, and just so you were wondering, she's not busy at all. So she's not busy at all.
Yes.
Look, I was rolling with you. Then you hit me with the 4-year-old, and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that's
Yes.
just
Uh-huh.
that's a
And
dagger right
I
there."
talk about that in my practice with some of my moms because there's a sense of having, I talk a lot about a support system.
Mm,
I could not
mm,
be who I am, do what I do without my support team. One of the main components is my husband.
mm.
And I do say that often because everyone, they'll say that. They're like, oh, you're not busy at all. It is truly teamwork and team effort and effective communication that
Absolutely.
provides us
Your
the
husband
channel.
takes the shout out, like, "Hey,
Yeah,
appreciate you recognizing that we in this together." So,
correct. It is truly a team effort.
uh,
Could not do it without him.
absolutely. It's so much that goes into it. But let's kind of dive in. I don't even want to make the assumption that when we say maternal mental health, that everyone understands. Like at a base, when you say maternal mental health therapist, specifically, what is maternal mental health?
So, maternal mental health is the emotional and psychological well being of women during the perinatal period. So, the perinatal period includes pre pregnancy, pregnancy, and postpartum up to 2 years. So, whenever we talk about maternal mental health, we're talking about that specific mental health in that specific area.
Mhm,
We discuss a range of maternal health issues, including anxiety, depression, stressors, transitions, identity. We talk about when it comes to relationships, we talk about bonding with baby because that has a impact on child development. And then we talk about some of the nuances of motherhood in the
mm,
sense where we come from during delivery, healing from delivery. We talk about lactation. We talk
mm,
about pelvic health, things of that nature. And I provide you with appropriate resources and help you to navigate that. So we talk about referring to a lactation specialist, a pelvic floor physical therapist, or doula if needed, in order
mm.
to help you navigate those periods of time.
The pregnancy, and I know you said you have 2 kids. I have 2 kids. Again, like, what are you seeing? There are so many different emotions. There's so many different things that come to life, during the pregnancy and thereafter. Even,
Mhm.
personally, I mean, you start to reflect on your own family. I mean, just depending on how the pregnancy, I mean, there's just so many different moving parts. When you think how women are most impacted, what comes to mind first?
There's a component when we talk about, and I say it with a asterisk to it when we
Mhm.
talk about the hormonal changes.
Mhm.
And it is important to understand that even when we talk about pregnancy in itself, there is often a misconception that this is supposed to be the joyous moment of your life, the most joyous moment. Being pregnant, being in postpartum, you're supposed to be happy all the time. You're supposed to always be excited. And
Mhm.
oftentimes with mothers, I talk about the component of dual emotions,
Mhm.
where yes, you can hold the emotion of being completely in love and excited and happy about this journey that you're on, but we can also acknowledge the challenges that come with it. We can acknowledge the depressive symptoms that come, the sense of anxiety that come, the sense of OCD that come when you have a mother. One emotion does not necessarily cancel out the other. So that is often what I see when women come to my practice, a sense of why am I not happy? And it's
Mhm.
like, because you're experiencing this, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not happy to have a child, which I mean, asterisk, so it could.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
most often, it's not that you're not happy to have a child. I call it the trenches. You are in the trenches.
Mhm.
It is a struggle in that postpartum period. 80% of women experience baby blues. So that's that first 2 weeks postpartum. 80%. And then when we look at postpartum depression, 1 in 8 women experience postpartum depression. 1 in 5 women experience some kind of perinatal mental health disorders. So those are disorders specific to the perinatal period. Black women have disproportionately higher rates of perinatal mental health conditions, but they have the least amount of treatment that they receive.
Mhm.
So when we speak about perinatal mental health and maternal mental health in that sense, there are some things that I see in my practice that just needs to be normalized
Yeah.
because women feel as though they're struggling when in reality there are others that have this shared experience with you. You are not alone.
Yeah. When you talk about, the baby blues and,
Mhm,
1 in 8. So where do you draw this line, between, hey, you just, it's just hormones and, you actually may need to see a therapist or some professional help. Like, where is that line? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, is this
mhm.
normal? Because you do want to normalize, some of the just ways that
Correct.
you're impacted that may not necessarily warrant, oh my gosh, I need, professional help. But at the
Mhm,
same time, you also don't want to just bottle it in and just tough it out because over at a certain point, it could be something more. Where's that line?
mhm. So for baby blues, so like we talk about, 80% of women experience baby blues. And this is because after delivery, that is one of the most drastic hormonal transitions that women will experience.
Explain the
So,
baby blues a little bit, like
yes.
what is baby blues?
So baby blues is an onset, usually to that hormonal shift, where you experience symptoms of crying, you experience symptoms of negative feelings about
Mhm,
maybe yourself in that sense. So, for the baby blues, usually it should start to wane about 2 weeks. I usually give that period, or I say 2 to 4 weeks, because the waning
mhm.
process may take some time.
You got a little
You
grace in
Correct, right?
there.
So you should start feeling a sense of improvement in your overall disposition where you're not necessarily having these sense of depressive symptoms. It's not necessarily depression, just these symptoms of depression that you're experiencing. Those should start to wane in that 2 to 4 week time period.
Mhm,
If you see that you are still having immense crying spells, or you're still feeling those heavy negative feelings, and we even go to the sense of suicidal thoughts
mhm,
to
mhm.
that extent, that is when it becomes a concern. However, for me, I operate in the sense of proactive and preventative.
Okay.
I always say the soapbox that I stand on is that if you are planning to become pregnant or if you are pregnant, just as how you seek out an OBGYN, you need to seek out a mental health therapist.
Yeah.
Because that life transition that occurs, I really think society does a poor job in acknowledging the drastic life transition that occurs, especially for women, because we have this mentality where this is normal, this is natural, you should just be able to get through it, you should be able to continue with life as it
Maternal
is.
instinct, yeah.
Correct. When in reality, it's such a stark life transition. A lot of times women go through identity crisis.
Mhm,
They don't realize they no longer know who they are. They're not enjoying the things they did before. They don't know what things they should be enjoying in this season of motherhood. So my soapbox that I often stand on is proactive mental health therapy when if you're planning to become pregnant, because one, that journey does not always go as we anticipate.
Mhm.
Oftentimes people think, if I want to become pregnant, I just have unprotected sex and yes, I am pregnant. When
Mhm.
in reality, that does not happen for quite a few women. When we talk about fertility treatments is a emotional roller coaster. You need to have a mental therapist on staff.
Yeah.
When I talk about your healthcare ecosystem
Mhm.
in this period of life. And we talk about your OB, we talk about your mental health therapist, we talk about your doula, your
Man,
pelvic or physical therapist, your lactation specialist.
you
Like
need a
it
whole
is a
football
true
team.
right. You need, and I think that's the misconception. Often women say, well, I have my OB. Well, yes, your OB addresses your medical concern, but what about everything else?
Yeah, I'm so
And
glad you said that about the proactive piece because you're right. A lot of times, once we get to this point and things are just horrible, then
mm,
I'll seek help. And not to say that everything is preventable, but you can just have a better process in some instances if you have the right team and the right support around you.
correct. Absolutely. And when I work with women, especially women who are pregnant or planning to become pregnant, I often talk about a birth plan, which is the thing that people always put together. But I also talk about a postpartum plan.
Yeah.
What do you need in place to support you during your postpartum period? What do you need from your significant other? What do you need from your family and friends if they're involved? If you have other children, what does that look like? If this is your first child, what does that look like? So I put together a postpartum plan.
If this is someone's first time, though, having a child, a lot of times you don't know what you need. And
Mhm.
so, there's no like, this is how you raise a child.
Correct.
But
Uh-huh.
just like it's no, there's some things you can do, but there is no like standard book on pregnancy. And at this time, you have this. How do you know what you need? How do you prepare for something that you may not have ever experienced?
Correct. And that is a part of one, the birth plan. So in the birth plan, we go through various delivery options. So we go through whether you're doing a vaginal delivery, C-section, if emergency C-section happens, what
Mhm.
does that look like? So for the birth plan, we go through all of that. When we talk about skin to skin contact, when we talk about delayed cord cutting, things of that nature. But then when we get into the postpartum plan, the first thing I address is that first week home.
Okay.
Um, because if this is your first child, you are going to go through a system shock.
Hmm.
We talk about the basic needs, right? So sleeping, eating, showering, going outside.
Yeah,
Those are
you're
my
not
four
gonna get
basic.
any sleep though. You can just
Correct, right? So that's what the sleep is out the window. Like sleep is non-existent. And that goes beyond the first because baby
Mhm.
wakes up in the middle of the
I
night,
wish it
sometimes
was
quite.
1 week, but unfortunately,
Right. It's not.
that's not the case.
And that is the first component I address because that is a true misconception for new moms is that they truly do not understand the lack of sleep they will get. So
Mhm.
I talk about it in detail. I talk about how can you have a support system. I talk about the 2 a.m. buddy. Every mom I work with who's pregnant, I say you need a 2 a.m. buddy. You need someone who's close by who you can call at 2 a.m. and be like, I need help. And they will show up
That's
because
good.
oftentimes the spouse who's usually has to go back to work after a period of
Mhm.
time.
Oh, yeah, 'cause I'm
In this
asleep, or at least faking like I'm asleep at 2 AM.
correct. I'm glad. Thank you for the honesty.
I'm telling you, like, "Oh,
Because
no, nah, your
yes,
week."
oftentimes your partner is asleep or there's a sense of they have work in the morning so they need the sleep and you feel alone in that 2 a.m. moment. You are crying, the baby's crying, they're not feeding, you don't know what's wrong
Mhm.
with them. You need a 2 a.m. buddy to say, I need you to show up and I need you to hold this baby.
You talk about that 2 AM buddy, and I'm kinda joking, but I was serious about acting like I'm asleep, but the reality is, though, I've seen a lot of couples, I mean, fight over this, and,
Mhm,
one is like, "Hey, I need you to help with the baby." The other one is, "But I have to go to work tomorrow
mhm,
morning." How do
mhm.
you help couples navigate those dynamics? It's like, hey, and again, there's so many different factors into it, but just at a baseline, hey, I'm up with the baby, I'm tired. need you to help out. But then the other person is like, yeah, I hear you and I will help out, but I got to go to work in the morning. And if I'm up,
Mhm.
eh, what is your advice?
The first thing is that we have to respect each person's definition of tired.
Mm,
So where you are tired from being up with the baby or being home all day with the baby, your spouse may be tired from being at work all day. You're like, well, yeah, they're at work. That's what they've been doing. At
mhm,
some point, you'll have to go back to it potentially. But there's a sense of respect that has to be there for however that individual defines tired, right?
mm,
There's a component as well where I talk about the 2 a.m. buddy. You, as much as your spouse, you guys are a team, you guys are in it together. That is not your only support system.
mm,
Tap into your other support systems that are available. So often women are afraid for to ask for help in a
mhm,
sense, especially when we talked about Black women. For a Black woman, oftentimes perinatal mental health disorders show up as if they're failing. That's one
mm,
of the symptoms. It does not show up as our diagnostic criteria often demonstrates.
mhm.
So it's important to understand, especially working with certain cultures, that for women reaching out to seek help, they're like, I don't want to seem like I'm failing at this. I don't want to be judged that I'm failing as a mom. And it's like you really have to dispel some of those misconceptions that exist to say, no, reach out. If you need the support, you need the support. I've had
Yeah,
women that in the middle of the night pack their children in the car and drive to a friend's house at like 2 o'clock in the morning, ring the doorbell and say, hey, I need help.
yeah,
And I'm like,
she was at wit's end. If you backed everybody up and left it,
correct.
that's enough's enough. I need some help right
Exactly.
now. Yeah.
Yes. And I feel as though there's a struggle that happens when it's like, no, your spouse is there to support. Yes. But I talk about tapping into your other support systems.
Yeah. Going back to the spouse, and again, I know it varies from relationship to relationship,
Mhm.
spouse terms and all of that. But generally speaking, what advice would you give to men as they support their spouse during this period?
Be present. Be
Okay.
present physically, be present emotionally.
Hey, now this is me and you talking to, so you're gonna have to explain that, in a way.
Mhm. So, what that means, being present physically, like we talked about, one of the things is that the spouse has to return to work,
Yeah.
right? There's a sense of ensuring that even though you're away at work, is your significant other set up to succeed at home with this baby, right? So
Mm-hmm.
whether that means, okay, I know I might have to stay up a little later to wash all the bottles to make sure that they're prepped, or I might have to stay up a little later to fold the baby's clothes so that tomorrow morning she's not having to go through all the baskets of clothes to find something for the baby to wear, or making sure the diaper station is set. So is there wipes? Is there, you are setting her up, even though you're not there physically, she can feel your physical presence because you have established everything for her to succeed for that day with you not being there.
That's good. That's good. You
Well,
you you broke it down, because you got
correct.
specific. Because if you leave it up to chance, I'm gonna do what I. But
Quick
going back,
blood.
just kind of staying in that same vein, you talk about obviously how the woman is affected, during this period. How does how she's impacted on average affect the person she's with? You know?
Yes. Oftentimes, what occurs is the spouse does not know how to interact.
Mm,
Especially when we get to the point of we're diagnosed with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So maybe we have perinatal postpartum depression, perinatal postpartum anxiety, perinatal postpartum OCD. Oftentimes, the spouse does not know how to show up.
mm,
And in that lack of knowing how to show up, there's this sense of, and the woman also, the birthing person, does not know how to communicate to the spouse what is happening because sometimes they're just as lost. So,
mm,
therefore, the significant other is impacted through this sense of kind of isolation. There's
okay.
this sense, often what I see is that they're completely shut out.
Hmm.
One of the things I talk about quite often is communication. You have to speak as the birthing person, you have to speak about what you're going through. It is okay. When I talk about 1 in 8 women have postpartum depression, 1 in 5 have a mental health condition in postpartum. It is okay to talk about what you're going through. Talk about it with your spouse. Do not isolate them.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the spouse also can have perinatal mood and anxiety disorders as well. So
Mhm.
men can also experience postpartum depression. Men can also experience postpartum anxiety.
Yeah. And I don't even know how to frame this as a question here, but I've seen this happen as well, where we kind of underestimate a man's ability to be present and to support, because again, obviously we're not giving birth to the child, and so
Correct.
how do you bridge that gap? Because I've seen this oftentimes where it's like, well, kind of like, what do you know,
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
this? And again, yes, you have to, acknowledge your own blind spots and weaknesses, but this is someone that is fully capable in many instances, not every instance. How do you kind of help, couples navigate that?
Setting realistic expectations.
Okay.
The first thing is your spouse will never truly grasp what you're going through.
Mm,
So oftentimes women, they're like, I need my spouse to understand how I'm feeling, what I'm going through, what it's like. No, that is not a realistic expectation because they have not lived your lived experience.
mm,
They have their own experience that they're experiencing as it pertains to introducing a newborn, and it's going to differ from yours. So when you sit down as a couple to try to communicate about the emotions that you're feeling, it's important to understand that your spouse can empathize with what you're going through, but they don't necessarily have to fully understand it.
mm.
And
Yeah,
that is okay. It's so
yeah,
they don't have to know. So many
yeah,
times men are like, they don't get it. I'm like, they're not expected to get it.
yeah. That's good. I mean, man, I wish you could tell some of the couples I work with that because they're like, no, he just doesn't get it. No, he just doesn't get it. I'm like, yeah, because they're not
That's
you.
okay. Right. That's okay. It's okay that they don't get it.
Now, with
Go
with
ahead.
with me, I want I was sitting there thinking about this as you were talking, and that is, you want to be supportive, okay?
Mhm,
But what advice would you have for me? And if like, is there a boundary that you need to put in place? It's like, okay, I understand you're going through this, but you kind of being not the nicest
mhm,
person.
mhm. Correct.
Should they just kind of understand that this is a normal part of the process and like, hey, just give it 2 months, give it 3 months? Or should there be a line where it's like, okay, I want to be supportive, but at the same time, I still want to create a healthy boundary to where I don't begin to, internalize some of the things that may be said during this period.
Correct. During the early stages of postpartum, grace is the word I say over and over. Give
Yeah,
each
you
other grace.
want to tough it out.
Give each other grace. There's a phrase that I often say where it's assume good intention and ask for clarification.
Mm,
During that postpartum period, words come out that we often don't intend for them to come out the way they come out on both ends. And it's that high stress environment. The lack of sleep is a component. One of the
mm,
things is often we're not eating as nutritious food as we should. We're not engaging in often any form of physical activity. We're not getting outside. There are many components where we talk about basic needs that we're missing. And therefore, in that high stress environment, oftentimes words come out on both parties
mhm,
that we don't intend. So I often say, assume good intentions and then ask for clarification. So if your spouse is questioning your emotional availability, do not automatically go to the sense of, oh, it's a negative.
mhm.
No, assume that they really do want to have a conversation and then ask for what they actually meant by the things that they said. Do
Mm,
not automatically go in defense mode. When we
yeah,
talk about the team, you guys are you're on the same team. Okay.
you
This
are.
is not a battle to see who wins. There is no win if you guys are
You're on the
battling.
same team when you had the baby. So,
Correct, correct. And I when I talk to couples about that all the time, like just assume good intentions.
mm,
You
and
are
that,
not intentionally trying to harm each other.
yeah, self care is a word that gets thrown out a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, again, I think it was 24, probably like 2022, buzzword like self care,
Uh-huh.
and I'm a huge fan of it. But what I really want to focus on though is the mom guilt.
Oh. Mhm.
Because, we can list out all the things to kind of take care of yourself, and we know that. And I, to be honest, this is just coming. My wife has shared this oftentimes. It's like,
Mhm.
well, you know. sometimes she's like, well, I feel guilty if I'm leaving the girls, or and I love my girls, but I don't really feel guilty. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go to the gym. I'm out of here.
Uh,
And so I know it has to be something, deep down, because there's a lot of things that she won't do that she may want to do because she feels guilty, even though I'm giving her permission. And I'm not in a
mhm,
inferiority type way, but I'm like, nah, baby, go on, take it, do you. And it's,
uh-huh,
but it's like this sense of responsibility that almost teeters on a little bit of unhealthiness, because it's like,
mm,
you got to take care of you. Like, I'm here to support you. I can't do it for you.
mhm.
What what do
Correct.
you what advice would you give to that piece, the mom guilt?
Yes. When we talk of self-care, the one thing I often say, self-care can look very different for everybody.
Mhm,
Self-care is how you promote and replenish yourself physically, emotionally, mentally for your optimal well-being. So, one of the things, especially when it comes to mom guilt, we really have to reframe how we look at self-care.
mhm,
Self-care is not selfish by any means. And when
mhm,
we talk about um, the impact it has on when, especially when you talk about your wife, she's like, I need to be here for the kids. I can't leave. This mom guilt starts to come in of you balancing the time you use for yourself with the time that you use for the kids. And your children's mental well being is built upon your mental well being.
mhm,
So if you are not taking care of yourself mentally, if you are not providing yourself with time to replenish and recoup, because parenting, it gets difficult sometimes.
oh, yeah,
You are
oh,
then not showing up, right? You're not showing up in your best self for your children. So when you think about, we really have to reframe our thoughts in how we think about. I often tell people, your mental well-being is more important than your children. And when I often say that, people often look at me like, what? My kids are the most important people in
mm,
my life. I'm like, yes, but if you fall apart, who's there to take care of them?
true.
No one. So
Mhm,
you have to take care of you in order to be present for them.
yeah.
That is the key component.
If someone knows that mentally, theoretically, they get it,
Mhm,
but they're still having trouble executing on it, what is one tangible step that they can
yeah.
do? Again, you may not go from where you are to where you need to be, but
Mhm.
just start the process to create some momentum. What's one step they can take?
The 10-minute rule. So
Okay.
I say every once a week, you need 10 to 30 minutes that you schedule in your calendar for yourself. It is as important as every single thing that is on your calendar. And if you cancel that appointment, you owe yourself. Just
Mm.
like if you cancel your doctor's appointment, they're going to charge you if you cancel in 24 hours.
Oh,
The
yeah.
same thing. Correct.
Please don't
This
be a
appointment.
no-show. Are you full
Correct. It's full price. Okay.
section?
So that appointment on your calendar for your, whether it's 10 minutes, I always tell them start with 10 minutes.
Mhm.
Whether you want to go sit on the patio for 10 minutes, and this is where that communication piece with your spouse comes in. When we talk about setting boundaries and setting expectations, communicate to your spouse, hey, Wednesday mornings at 7 in the morning from 7 to 7:20, I will be on the patio. Your spouse say, okay, I got it. It has to be routine, one, because in order to set, we have to make it routine in order for it to become a habit. And
Mhm.
two, for it to be routine so your spouse can adjust their schedule accordingly. Right?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
cannot just spring self-care. You guys are a team. So you can't
Mhm.
just spring, okay, I'm leaving right now. Say, okay, wait, but we have all these pieces to work on. So schedule it. It is okay to schedule your self-care. It is okay to have 10 minutes. It's okay to, my goal oftentimes is to work with women in order to get it to an hour.
Okay.
So we just start with 10 minutes and then we go along and they're like, oh, this was kind of good. I'm like, yeah, I bet. And then we increase to the fact we
I'm
need
sorry what
one
hour
hour.
trying to get to a day.
Right? My goal is usually 1 hour,
Whole
three
month
times
it's
a week.
all about me.
That's right. That is ideal. Okay.
I'm just
Um,
I can't take
but
1
you
hour.
have to, yeah, you have to, as a mom, you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of your kids. And
Yeah.
this is why when we don't take care of ourselves, this is when we have that impatience, we get snappy,
Mm,
we get moody, we start to show up in those negative emotional symptoms
mhm.
because you are burnt out, because you have not taken any time to recoup and refresh yourself.
Yeah.
So as we talk about mom guilt, I work on reframing that self-care. to the sense of truly understanding that it is not selfish.
Yeah, that's good. Something that often gets kind of left out of the conversation, particularly we talk about maternal mental health,
Mhm.
adoption. You're
Mhm.
taking on, whether you
Mhm.
adopt, sometimes, say my brother, something happens, or, and I have to take on their kid, do you, is it, is it the same, like what advice when you think about how their mental health is impacted? Again, let's just say we adopt, or let's just say,
Mhm.
is their experience similar? When you think about some of the challenges that they should kind of anticipate as they enter this new
Yeah.
season of life?
A lot of it's very similar in the sense of the logistical changes that occur, right? So the lifestyle changes. But then when we look at adoption, especially when we look at the reason for adoption, so are you adopting because you went through fertility challenges and you could not produce biological child? In that sense, we talk about the grief and loss that comes with that. When we look at adoption in the sense of identity and attachment, being able to bond with the child even though they're not your biological child, we talk about those aspects. So there are additional components that come into the mix when we talk about adoption, because in that sense that this is my child, but
Yes.
they're just not my biological child. So
Mhm.
there's a sense of loss that we navigate that comes with that. But then also, if you adopt due to a traumatic experience. So, for instance, a family member passes away traumatically, and you're now the guardian of their children. There's a sense of working through that trauma, in the sense of how can you show up for those children. But the
Yeah.
logistical lifestyle changes very much the same in
Identical.
incorporating a child. hmm But there's some additional components that we have to address when it comes to mental health. And then we
Yeah.
talk about caregiver. The number one thing, caregiver burnout. We
Mhm.
talk about caregiver burnout, and then also role reversal, because oftentimes when we talk about caregiver, it's oftentimes the child who is now taking care of their elderly parents, and then there's a role reversal that occurs. So
Mhm.
we address that component as well.
Yeah. There's so many different nuances to this, just kind of in closing, if there was one piece of advice that you would have for anyone, whether they're, pregnant, considering, beginning that process, whether they're post, or adopt, like
Mhm.
just when you put it all together, like what's one single piece of advice that you would offer?
Do not wait
Mm,
until you are in a mental health crisis to seek mental health care. Be preventative,
mm.
be proactive. I call it the toolbox. We build your toolbox in order to give you coping mechanisms to navigate the challenges that arise. We
Mm.
don't want to be building your toolbox in the challenge.
No.
So be proactive in that sense, and do check-ins with your therapist. Say,
Yeah.
hey, can I just schedule a check-in appointment? I know I discharged, but I just want to see, make sure I'm doing okay and navigating life appropriately. I do have those appointments. I say, yes, you could check with me, come back. We could have a couple sessions just to make sure that we're navigating okay. If I feel as though you're navigating okay, we'll have that conversation and terminate.
Yeah.
It is okay to go back to therapy. Therapy is not a checkbox that you check and done. It is
Mm.
not. It is a
No.
lifestyle integration that happens in helping you navigate the challenges in life.
Yeah, you're so right. Dr. Shaenor, I appreciate you, spending time with us today. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I am on all socials, Dr. Shaenor, you can find me, or through my business, Inspired Counseling Center. I do have a website, www.inspired with a D, counselingcenter.com, or Dr. Shaenor on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, I'm on.
That's awesome. Hey, and also don't forget to follow us online, Instagram, Nic Hardy underscore, and all the other social media platforms. That's the only one I remember right now. So
Yes.
make sure you check out some of the other episodes on the Untherapeutic Podcast as well.